different things from our computer. So let's find the desktop, and we've got the Qualitative Researchers project here. Now this is a project, and I'll put the link in the description later, which allows us to practice and teach qualitative analysis. These are real interviews with professors of qualitative research. We got permission to anonymize them and make them public. There's nothing particularly controversial in them, but it's a good data set of real semi-structured interviews on open-ended topics that you can use to practice your own qualitative research and your qualitative analysis before you have any data of your own. So these are just Word documents actually. You can also bring in PDF files, rich text files. So you might want to bring in stuff to do a literature review. Quirkos and qualitative software is a great tool for doing that kind of thing. You may also bring in different sources of data that you might have from like surveys. If they're in spreadsheet format, you can bring in Excel data in this way as well. But for now, let's just bring in these Word files. We'll click on the open button and it says file imported. I think we brought in 7. And you'll see these, now we've got these vertical tabs here. And these tabs are used to switch between the different sources in our data. So they work very similar to the tabs in your browser, except that they kind of run up and down to kind of give us a bit more space for the title descriptions, honestly. And those are the 7 sources that we've put into the project. Now we can add more at any time. So you may just bring in one at a time. You may have batches of data that you do in different periods and you'll bring those in later and so on. But for now, we're just bringing these in so we can kind of choose one to go through it. What do we do? Rogers to start with. Okay, so we've got this source here, Roger Health. So Roger was a pseudonym, but a professor in health research. And then what we've got here at the bottom, at the top right, is this button here for properties. And properties is the way in Quirkos that we manage, sort, and group all the different sources that we bring into the project, so the different types of data that we bring in. So let's click on the properties button here. Not much in here at the moment, except the option here to change the title. So we might remove the the file description there. 3 Roger Health. And we've got the option here to add new properties. So the properties can be any way that we want to categorize or annotate or have metadata for any of our sources. So demographic information, for example, is one of the key ones. So you might have a property like age, and we might say that someone is 34 or 17 or whatever. We can add these as we go along. So we've now got a property called age, which we can edit and change with this cog button here. And then with the drop down list, we can choose the age 34. So now if we go to our other tabs, we can choose the age for this person. So Matilda's actually 42. So we'll add that as the value for her age. Now you might have other things like location would be an obvious one, occupation, how long they've worked in a particular field, whatever's interesting and relevant for your data set. But the other thing which is really useful here is that you can use these to categorize the type of data as well. So for example, you might have a property which is called data type. We might have a project which involves interviews. So those would be semi-structured interviews. And we might also have focus groups. We may also have survey respondents. And that way we can keep track of all the different sources of data we have there. Okay, these are all interviews, so we should probably tab that at some stage. But we can also filter by this. And later on, I'll show you how you could see, for example, just what people over a certain age were saying, or just what people were saying in an interview, and how that was different to how people spoke in a focus group, in a group session. So you can add these properties anytime. You don't have to do them as soon as you bring in the sources of data. But it's kind of like a neatness thing, I guess, to kind of have them kind of categorized and sort, so that later on you can kind of start exploring them across all these different lines. But remember, you can always add them later. So if you suddenly decide that you're actually basically creating a category which is that you didn't expect, like all people who've actually been to see live music within the last 2 years. And that's just a yes or no thing, but that somehow splits your data set in a really meaningful and interesting way, and you want to compare that. So you can create properties that group your sources of data in any way that you want. So I'll press the properties tab in the top right to turn that off, and we'll get back to the text. I'm actually just now going to go here to the settings and make the text a little bit bigger. We can change the settings for the width, whether we count the number of quotes we have. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we'll just keep it like this for now. So, okay, that's a bit better for streaming, I hope. So what we're going to do now is basically start creating our codes and later on the themes that we use to explore the data. Now, it may be that you're taking an approach like a kind of a priori coding approach or a framework or an evaluation criteria where you've got an idea of what those are going to be ahead of time. And in that case, you can just use the plus button here or right click to create a new code or theme here. So this might be about studies. Space here to put in a longer description of what we mean by that. Anytime where the respondent is talking about learning. And there's an option here to choose colors or even kind of gradients of colors if you want to have similar types of topic connected with similar things. So we'll give that kind of blue color. So that's where we right clicked. So that's our studies code. So for example, here what we could do is say I did a master's degree in sociology. Okay, right, so that's about studies, it's about learning. So what we'll do is we'll select that text by clicking and dragging there with the mouse, and then drag and drop it over and let go onto that bubble. We can also actually just select some text here, that's also about studies, and then just click on the bubble that we want to add to. Now, we can add as many bubbles as we need, so we might also create another one here which is called work. So we've got studies and work. I'll make that one green. And then I worked for 6 years for the National Health Service as General Manager. Good, that's going to go in work. I guess I was on, that's all about work. That goes in there as well. And you can see now, so we've got a color-coded highlight showing us which section of text connects to which, and if we hover our mouse over these here, that will get highlighted and it will show us the name of that code. So that's about work, that's about studies. If we want to change our mind about any of this, we can right click to delete the highlight just for that section, but everything's got an undo redo, so you can go back and change your mind for those things within this session. Now as we go along, we'll probably find more things that we want to pull out about. So they keep talking about the National Health Service, the NHS. So let's select all of this, drag and drop into an empty space to create a new code already with that text in it, and we'll call it NHS. And this is all about the NHS too. Actually, that whole section is, so we click and drag that onto there as well. So what you can do is you can have one section of text which is about multiple things. So this is about learning, but also about going in the NHS, and work and the NHS as well. So again, the highlights column here will adjust the more highlight stripes you have, and they will overlap the more that you have different overlaps. And we'll see later there's different ways to visualize those as well. So the process now would be going through selecting more. This is about studies as well. This is about working for the NHS, we'll put that on there as well. But we may very quickly get to the stage where we have created a bunch more codes. Let's create one here for strategy, because they're talking about that. Information strategy, maybe this will be important, maybe it won't. And what we might want to do is consider things that might get grouped together. So let's briefly look about how we would do that. So one of the things we can do is actually just move things around. So we can drag and drop to move these bubbles around, and just by having things in one location, so everything we've got in the top left, for example, this may be all kind of work related things. But we can also create more formal connections between the codes by creating what we call hierarchies, by dragging and dropping codes on top of each other. So I would argue that actually kind of all these things are a subset of work. So work could be studies. Studies work? Yeah, it's a work kind of thing. And the NHS, working for the NHS is work. Doing strategic stuff is work. But then we can also have things here which is home life. So maybe this is important as well. So it might be paying the mortgage. It might be looking after children. And these may be important things for us as well. And again, we can just drag and drop these on here. What you'll notice is that these bubbles are a lot smaller, and that's because we're not adding anything to them. So every time we add something to one of these bubbles, they increase in size. So that bubble, the size of that bubble gives us just a kind of ongoing sense of what's emerging from the data, or at least what we're coding a lot. So as we go through, we'll go through, maybe we'll change our ideas. Okay, maybe strategy is actually kind of neutral from that. Maybe we'll put those back there. But there's lots of flexibilities we go through coding and interpreting and analyzing these text documents to create codes and themes that match what we're seeing, and also to change our mind as those things kind of evolve as we look through it. I mean, it's often the case that we'll go through and create one set of codes for a particular individual, and then when we go through to see someone else, well, maybe there might be some common stuff. Yes, they do work. Yes, they did studies, but actually their home life things are all kind of arranged around gardening, and the other person never mentioned gardening. So it's always one of those kind of dialogues between the data and the interpretation, that we're trying to find things which are common across our different participants, but also trying to capture the unique things and the differences between different people responding to our data. So now the process is pretty simple in terms of we go through, we see what's going on here. This is about studies. And so we go through and we kind of, with very consciously and with a kind of open mind, try and interpret what's going on here, tagging things which we think are of interest. And we'll go through and we'll code, and we'll keep creating codes. Later on, we might create themes and kind of higher level interpretations of the data. But anyway, the software will help us keep track of all these different things. And when we come to write up, the advantage is that we double click on our work things here. We know under here we've got things about studies and things about the NHS. We can click on one of these bubbles just to see everything that we coded from all our different sources of text about being on the NHS. And that's one of the most useful things in my head about using any kind of qualitative analysis tool. I mean, we try and make Quirkos as much as like using kind of pen and highlighters and that kind of interpretation approach as possible. But at the end of the day, the main advantage comes at the end when we're trying to find these quotes and we're trying to compare what different people have said. The software tool, and any software tool, just makes it a lot easier to find everything on a particular topic or theme, or everything that one particular person had said, or from a particular group of people. And so that's really helpful when we come to write up, to find the quotes we want, and also just to kind of read through so we can start to absorb and analyze the differences between the different data sets that we have. Now, creating these codes and themes isn't the only way that we might interpret the data. We may also want to do analytic text. We may take advantage of different interpretation types like IPA or in vivo coding, in which we use the participants' own phrases and words to summarize or interpret the data. And so in Quirkos, we usually capture these things with what we call the memos. And this is a little bit like kind of either scribbling in the margin of your piece of paper, or it's like adding a little kind of post-it note to your transcript. And what we can do here is select a piece of text, and rather than drag and dropping it onto a code, we can drag and drop it onto this memos column on the left, which we can make bigger and wider with the memos button here. And what that does is allow us to write sometimes even a short but possibly a longer thing, which is selected to a particular part of the data set, so that particular phrase. So when my first job was when I finished my PhD, was actually on an academic journal. So they have always worked in academic related fields. Interesting. So we might use that for our own interpretations, our own reflections. We might use this for our own questions, like what do they mean by structured here? and that might be something we need to come back to. We may also use it for doing kind of summaries if we're doing an IPA or an analytical approach that likes to do a kind of line-by-line interpretation. We can also use this as a sort of intermediary step before creating codes. So again, like IPA in particular, interpretive phenomenological analysis kind of likes us to go through, for each sentence, have something that we say about it, first job. And then what we'll do is go through and we'll say that for all the sentences in the data set, or at least everything that's relevant. And then later we'll go back and use these memos to find codes and themes which are kind of start bringing multiple of those kind of comments and memos together. So beginning to develop those higher level codes and interpretations. So that can really help, because now if we kind of select one of these here, okay, this is about work, we can then kind of add and code or create new codes around them before first jobs. And there's another way that we can annotate and write our kind of analytic text, and that's with the chat function here. Now, obviously the chat is a live chat thing, so it's really helpful if you're working kind of live on a project together and the different people can kind of talk about what they're doing. But you can also use it to kind of talk to yourself. And so in other words, kind of keep a log of what you're doing. So I decided that it was interesting when people talked about their first job. So I created a code for it. Not very exciting, but you may have things like, I thought the term strategy was too managerial for what I am covering, and I changed it to plans. And so these are the kind of things that otherwise get lost. So obviously we can edit our codes anytime. We thought this was about strategy, but it's really about plans and planning for the future, and it's not quite so technical as the word strategy kind of implies. And so again, the software allows us this flexibility. By keeping a kind of log of these things here, it's a good discipline, again, when we come to write up, to understand our decision-making process and have a basically a paper trail of how we got to the coding framework that we're using. Okay, so those are the main kind of ways that we can kind of analyze and explore the data. And what I'm going to do now is, rather than spending another, well, I think we spent like 6 or 7 hours probably doing a very first kind of analysis and interpretation of this data, I'm actually just going to jump straight into a project where we've actually coded a lot more of this, and then we can see how some of the tools in Quirkos allow you to visualize and explore the data in different ways. So everything is auto-saved in Quirkos, so you don't have to kind of keep clicking save. That's the same if you're working with the offline version or the cloud version. But we can so that means we can just go to the projects here and then open another project that we have. So we'll just look for journeys here. I think this one, let's have a look. Yeah, okay, I think this is the one. Okay, so this is now a lot more kind of coded. We've got some very big kind of subcategories here, like teaching, all the different aspects of teaching we have here, who does the teaching, their favorite approach, different aspects of it, if they enjoy teaching, what the challenges are, do the students enjoy your teaching, cautionary tales about teaching, and so on. We've also got this theme, this big theme here about vulnerabilities. This was one of the things that really kind of came out from the data when people weren't feeling very confident about their research or their place within academia. And so that's a really interesting thing here. Denial, training gap, expectations, and so on. So we've created these subcategories and then sometimes sub-subcategories here to help kind of explore this data. This show's a little cluttered because I'm quite zoomed in for you, but you can kind of zoom in and out to these as much as you like. Again, we can sort these, and now we have a lot of codes. It might be worth looking at some of the different ways that we can order them here. So we couldn't put these in a list view, so this would be similar to what you'll see in most other software like NVivo or MaxQDA. But there's also kind of like an arranged grid view here, which might be more useful. or the word cloud here, and that allows us to see which words are coming out most often and kind of explore with a kind of looking at the dialogue and how different people use that. So people using the word know and kind and research and think about, but also things a bit more specific like students and methods and so on. So we can click on any of these to run a search and find all the instances where these words appeared. But let's go back to the main Canvas view here, and let's explore some of the ways now that we can look at the data. Now, one of the first things that I want to talk about is these kind of like overlaps, is what we call them, where we've got one piece of text which has been assigned to multiple codes. This is something that Quirkos allows you to do as much as you like, but it's also something that Quirkos in the background is always kind of counting to see which codes are occurring together. So how often, as in this case, do we have sections of text which we've tagged to be as about something where someone changed, that was surprising, and it's also about landscape knowledge? Well, let's find out. So let's look at, let's just choose one of these. Okay, surprising, that's kind of an interesting one. What kind of things were surprising? So what we can do is right click on this bubble here and then choose the overlap view. And the overlap view shows us how many times we tagged something as being surprising and also tagged as something else. Now we've got this memo A column. So this was not column, but bubble here. This was used to kind of keep track of kind of our own thoughts and comments on things. But below that, we've got our big theme of vulnerabilities. So now what we can see just with a couple of clicks is all the instances of text which are about surprising things that were also about vulnerabilities, so kind of unexpected vulnerabilities. But then there was also this thing about surprising things about landscape knowledge. So I guess kind of just understanding, and I guess the landscape here means kind of like the academic landscape and academia itself and kind of working in the workplace and so on. And so that might be really interesting to kind of see who's talking about this, Jackie and Bruce, and also what kind of things are occurring most often. Anything which is dropped off here didn't have any kind of overlaps, and there are some things here that only have kind of one overlap. But if you're creating lots of smaller codes, for example, particularly things like surprising, unsurprising, positive or negative things, this can become a very useful tool for doing subset analysis of your data. So maybe you want to see everything that's positive and everything that somebody said that's negative, particularly say if you're evaluating a service. But maybe you want to see everything that's positive which is about the staff, or everything that's positive about the car parking situation. And what this means is, rather than having to tag positive car parking comments and positive staff comments, you just tag everything that's about staff, everything that's positive, and things which overlap for both of them. Well, that feels like it's more work. What it means is you've got a lot more different ways that you can slice the pie when you come to the end of it. So you can see everything on a particular topic that's positive or negative, as well as just seeing everything that's about car parking in general. Because you may discover, actually, well, what people are saying is not positive or negative, they just don't use it, it's neutral. So just thinking about how you use the codes and themes can be quite useful to how you're able to interpret the data when you've been through and done all this coding. Now, the next thing that I want to show is some of the other ways that we can filter the data, another way that we can do subset analysis. If you remember the properties we created here before, in this example dataset now we've got gender, location, discipline, other identified discipline, because people had primary and secondary disciplines and we wanted to be able to distinguish between that. We've got a summary here which we can add to kind of like a longer description of what we mean here. We also have kind of city if we need that more specifically than the location, but that's fine for now. So let's go now to the filter view, because this will allow us lots of different ways that we can kind of drill down and explore just particular subsets of the data. So let's click on the add criteria button here. To start with, we have a bunch of kind of meta properties, so things which are about the project itself. So if we're working with a whole bunch of people, maybe we want to see everything that just one coder did. So what things did they code, or what codes did they create? And this shows just those particular ones. And I'm in here somewhere as well. What codes? Okay, I created the messy journeys one, self-worth, relationships. So again, if you're wanting to do projects where you're doing kind of coding together, you want to compare your coding, this can be a very useful tool. Not necessarily for seeing the differences, but also the kind of similarities between how you're interpreting the data and what kinds of codes you're creating and using. You can also do this for time. So if you want to see work done on a particular time and date, or just a source name. So if you want to see everything just from Rogers here, there we go. So, and the thing he spoke about most was vulnerabilities. But let's look at the ones in italics here, and these are the source properties. So we've got gender, location, discipline. Let's look at discipline to start with. We've got sociology. And so now we've got comments just from our subset of data. So our interviewees, their primary discipline was sociology. And we can see kind of in descending order here which was the most used codes here. By clicking on any of them, we can see the text that's under them. So Jackie was obviously from sociology because we keep seeing her, and Danny as well. Oh, and I should also point out, you can just click on this here to go back to that section of the text if you want to see all the context around it. So this is quite interesting, but let's see how it compares to something else. And what we can do in Quirkos is actually do comparison queries. So we can do two at once. I'm just going to have to zoom out a bit so I can show that. And let's choose discipline health. Okay, so this is interesting already. So vulnerabilities were the thing that people talked about most. Okay, but the training gap seems to be a bigger deal. Well, at least people talked about it more in the training in health than they did in sociology. Is this actually a significant finding? Well, now we can be proper qualitative researchers rather than just relying on these numbers and doing a quantitative interpretation. We can read through and see what people are saying. Maybe people are saying, well, there wasn't really much of a training gap in sociology, but in health, maybe there's a different expectation around training, and so that's what we're spotting here. But because we've got the whole text of what people said from those different disciplines here, we can read across the disciplines. So we can see what the differences are between our respondents from the different disciplines. And we can do this for any of these different ones we can have here. So we could do it for the location. We could see the difference between people in England and Scotland, for example. Okay, vulnerabilities is still the top issue there as well. But we can also stack more and more criteria now if we want to drill it down. So if we wanted to look for, well, we have the discipline already, like just people in England who did sociology. Okay, that's Jackie at least. So we can start kind of narrowing down our search if we need to. And again, it's one of the flexible ways that we can start exploring the data. And just because it's very quick and easy to do these kind of filters in Quirkos, it's quite fun to do them in a kind of, I wonder what if there is a difference for this. And then read and explore and see what you can see in that data. It's always very quick to run these, so you can kind of run as many as you like. And you may just discover that, you know, we didn't expect that there was going to be much of a difference in the training gap between these two different locations, but there really was. So that's a good way that you can start exploring your data. Now those are the filters. I'll zoom back in again a little bit now. The other things that I want to show you now is the different ways that we can export the data and the other kinds of data sets that we have. Now we've done all that coding and analysis. Now, as I've mentioned before, one of the important things that we always want to do is write up. And when we come to write up our data, having done all this coding, we've done a lot of the legwork so that it becomes a lot easier to start doing the evidence basing and finding those quotes that we want to use in wherever we're writing up, be it a thesis or a journal article or anything. If you look here at anywhere where we have the quotes, that's in the overlap view, it's in that filter view, and even here when we're just double clicking to see everything under a particular code, everything that's surprising, there's always a little tick box in the top right. And what that allows us to do is select one or more of these quotes, and then with the copy button here, copy and paste them to where we want to write up. So if we now start Word or LibreOffice, we can kind of copy and paste one particular code or all the particular codes that we wanted into where we're writing up, and they come through with this attribution of which source they came from. So that's very useful when we're writing up to have those quotes just straight to hand. But there are a whole bunch of different ways that we can export the data as well. So let's go here to the main menu and look at the export options. The first one that we have here is the Excel export. Now, one of the things that I should point out is that there's not really a lot of quantitative analysis that goes on in Quirkos. It's designed primarily to be a qualitative tool, and so what you'll find very quickly is that while we do things like count the number of different sources that we have there, or the different quotes that we have, there's not a lot of work which does kind of statistical interpretation. And our belief on this has always been that that's best done in dedicated software like SPSS or R or Excel, where you can do all kinds of different tests for significance and concurrence and all those kind of things. And the Excel output is a very important way to do that, because it allows you to see any aspect of the data. So here's all the quotes or all the quirks, to use things like the pivot and sort tables to explore them in different ways, and to count and do any kind of statistics that they want to do. It's also really useful for getting out things like your code books, your memos, in a nice kind of table format that you can kind of customize, format, and display in any kind of way that you want. It's a really nice way to get stuff in and out. So the sources here show all the data that we have, and then the different properties that we have for them. The quotes, those are all the times we made kind of extracts of the data. We've got the quirks here, so this is basically becomes our code book. So what each of the titles, the codes and themes were, a longer description of them, who created them and when, how often they were used, and how often they were used in different sources as well. So this gives you a whole bunch of different ways to kind of explore the data in a more kind of tabulated and quantitative way. If that's not the kind of thing you want to see, we also have the Word export. So this creates a separate file, as you see it's doing here, for each of the different sources of data. So I'll just close those. So we just need to look at one at a time, I guess, really. So here's the one we created for Caroline. And basically what this does is give us our transcript back as a standard Word file, but one where we've got the codes and themes as these color-coded memos. And this is really helpful if we want to kind of go away and read the transcript away from the computer without the temptation to code and do more coding, but also to share with as in an appendix, or to show with someone like a supervisor or a co-researcher how we've interpreted the data. And this is a nice thing to also kind of print out, and if you really want to kind of take away and read it over coffee as well. Now the other export that we have is the report here. And the report is kind of, I guess, the most commonly used export. And this has, in addition to kind of all the kind of tabulated data and all the kind of metadata that we have for the project, all the different visualizations that we have as well. So what you'll see here is we have these tables here for tabulated data. So this is the sources, a bit like in the Excel export. These are all the sources we have, how long they were, who put them in and when, how many times we had codes in them. Then we've got our kind of code book here, the connections between the codes. But then we've got things which more visual. So we've got these graphs here which show, the kind of gender balance and location balance here of our sources. And then we've got all the sections of text. But we've also got a bunch of different ways to visualize overlap. So this is how often codes occurred together. So the changed code most often with messy journeys, and surprising occurred most often with memo A. Okay, we already saw that, but also with vulnerabilities. So these are different ways that we can explore the data. We can also look at the quirks per source view here, and this is a little bit like the kind of matrix view in NVivo, in that it shows us kind of like the breakdown of how often codes were used in these different sources, and we can kind of compare them underneath each other. So unsurprising was used most in that Jackie's one, and vulnerabilities here, and so on. Now all of these different views, visualizations, and also different ways of just kind of sorting the data here are all customizable here. So each of these are kind of optional sections that you can turn off and on. If you don't want to see them, you just untick them. And then there's also the option here to kind of customize the layout. I'm not going to go into all these different things as well, but you can get the report customized in a way that's very kind of easy to read for you and shows and highlights the different parts of the data that you want. When you're happy with how that looks, the easiest thing to do is to use print and then print to PDF, so you get a PDF representation of it. There's also kind of a Word file which has the kind of basic governance of the report in it as well. And again, this is a nice thing for an appendix once it's customized, or also just to kind of share with supervisors and other people interested in the project. So those are the main kind of aspects of using Quirkos. The philosophy really is to have a very small number of tools that we don't use, that aren't very complicated, but flexible, that we can use them in lots of different ways. So we don't have lots of different reports, we don't have lots of different tools and visualizations, just a small number of things that we can visualize in this way. If you want to give it a try, do have a look on our website, that's quirkos.com. There's a lot more information on there as well. I'm just going to briefly look. If you've got any questions, do put them in the chat, and we can, and I'll get straight on to answering them. Doesn't look like there's anything at the moment. But if you do have any questions at any time, feel free to put them in the comments. We do check those and we will respond to anything. You can always email us, support@quirkos.com. We check that 7 days a week. And the easiest way is just to go and give it a free trial. You get 14 days free. There's no restrictions on what you can do during that period of time. And if you continue on with the paid subscription, then you have access to all of your data. As I said, the offline version is available as well. That basically works in the same way, but with an app on your computer. And what that does is allow you to make sure that your data is stored only on your computer where you save it. And if you've got, again, data confidentiality reasons that you're not allowed to store the data in any cloud service, then the offline trial is the one to go for. So thanks so much for coming along today. I hope this has been useful. Get in touch if you have any other questions, and good luck with your qualitative research.